for me, that is the biggest change. I think the power shots, there is a change to them, but all you need to do is just take that first touch, like as the ball's coming over your shoulder, and then hit the power shot, and it will still fly in. The headers and the contested headers and that area of the live tuning is, I'll be honest, it feels pretty spot on, to be honest, at the moment.
That's good to hear. And then in terms of dribbling, Josh, I mean, that's something that I know a lot of people have had issues with, is players not feeling very responsive. They've said that they specifically have made players take more frequent touches on the ball when jog dribbling. And they've said the intent behind this change is to enable more responsive turning while on the ball. And this was something I noticed. Funnily enough, I didn't realize the patch had happened, was using 𝘵𝘬𝘬 and was like, wow, he has insane dribbling. He's really good. And I think I even posted in the Discord being like, 𝘵𝘬𝘬's dribbling is ridiculous. And then I realized actually it was just because it was the first time I played after the patch. The other players did also seem to move a lot more kind of smoothly on the ball and have more control and were able to kind of react to defenders a bit better. But I think it's a sort of small change, not as impactful as the power shots and headers, but it seems like it's something that will help people get an advantage against defenders who do seem quite strong this cycle. I realise I've just answered the question I was asking you, Josh, but you can continue, I'm sure, anyway.
Well, I think in terms of like all three of those changes, I think all three were at different levels of change. It felt like the contested header one was a massive kind of nerf to how powerful it had been. The power shots was slightly less, and the improvement to dribbling was slightly less than that. But the improvement to dribbling, I think, was the right amount to have shifted it by. You can beat a defender that's overcommit now with just using left stick, which you couldn't do beforehand. It's still not as good as maybe some would like it. I know a lot of people have struggled to adapt to this game because dribbling has been a lot harder, and a lot of people used to just be able to walk through defenses rather than having to kind of pass their way through, and now they're struggling with passing as well. I didn't necessarily notice the dribbling massively until I watched one of my games back, and I realized I was able to turn out of pressure a lot more consistently without losing the ball than I had done before. And I think it's been difficult to determine whether that's the speed of the left stick and the number of touches, or the reduction in the success rate of tackles from behind, which I think was in the patch before the live tuning. But I think both of those things have meant it's not quite an instant loss of the ball now when you pass the ball into an under pressure attacker. You actually do have the opportunity to hold on to it as you turn away. I do have to agree with Richard. I think the corner patch / header patch has been pretty spot on, and it's stopped Arsenal dead in their tracks, really. So it's fantastic.
Very true. And any thoughts on, because we're talking about the live tuning here, but there was also the patch before. Do you feel like the game is in a better state than it was prior to that? Are there things that you'd still like to see change from your perspective?
I think it is in a slightly better state. There's still some work to do, but I'm really happy with the left stick improvement. I think I'm probably one of the guys that isn't fully happy with it yet, because I think it can still be better. And in previous years, it's been significantly better. But at least for me, it's a big upgrade compared to the game we had before the live tuning and the patch. And I do believe also for the corners, they've got that pretty much spot on. You can still score them here and there, but it's not like a penalty as it was before. Like before, we saw all the pro players and the competitive players going for a first-time power shot, not with the purpose of scoring a goal, but just to get a corner. And I feel like that's definitely not the case anymore. So I'm really looking forward to see how this left stick stuff can maybe impact the way some of the games are played, not only on pro level, but also as casual players, because this should theoretically, at least in my mind, make more room for the players who like to keep possession. And I don't really think you could get away with having high percentage of possession before, where it's more counter based. And I feel like when you can then hold the ball a bit more, you can move into space, you can protect the ball. then it should also give you some more tools to keep the ball and protect the ball and try to control the game, rather than always going for the counter attacks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Anything that anyone wants to add just before we move on from the patch?
I know there's been a decent amount of negativity throughout this game so far. I think at the moment we're definitely in an upwards trajectory. Last night, with it being the last FC Pro show, I'll give you a little bit of peek behind the curtain. There were quite a lot of people from EA who were there, and the general consensus was the live tuning that we continue to do in this game, like, this isn't a one-stop, like, it will become more frequent. This will, like, the live tuning will drastically improve the benefit of the game, and, like, people are watching who can actually make difference. People are listening and continue to feedback.
Yeah, it's a good point to make, and actually it's something that I mentioned on last week's gameplay episode. It was a supporter episode, so just to fill people in who maybe didn't hear that, there is a feedback portal for 𝘵𝗃𝗁𝗍, and it's basically a survey that you fill out, and you can attach like a YouTube clip if you've got something you want to raise in video form. And when you fill it out, it'll ask you, specifics about what element of gameplay you're giving feedback about. And EA are monitoring that very directly. Will make changes, and they're also analyzing data to see how many first-time power shots are scored and things like that. So keep giving feedback. It's obviously helped so far. I think it's fair to say after these recent patches, it's a shame this hadn't happened quicker, but it is good to see. Despite all that, you do still see negativity out there, Josh. And I think part of that is because people expect sort of things to disappear from the game entirely when they're patched. But obviously that isn't completely the case.
Yeah, I think there's an element of like reasonable expectations that have to go along with things. On the one hand, I've seen loads of people complaining that corners are essentially useless for them and they can't score them anymore. And then on the other hand saying, I thought first-time power shots had been patched with a clip of somebody scoring a green-timed power shot from about 18 yards out. And, you can't have both of those things. Like, yes, they have reduced the accuracy of first-time power shots, but power shots are manual. So if you've got good shooting and good aim and you green time it, it's probably still got a decent chance of going in. It's just not broken in the way that it was, where it wasn't that manual. Like, if you're 35 yards out hitting a first-time power shot with 𝘵𝗫𝗀𝘇, it found the top corner more often than it didn't. And that was broken. It was too accurate. Now it's not as accurate. Like, I don't know. I just think people see something's been patched, and the moment it happens in game, go, well, it's not been patched. And it has. It clearly has. But also, like, I think there's also needs to be an understanding of how complicated some of these things are. Like, the way that they've talked about how they've reduced corners, which is how we're all talking about it, is completely reduced accuracy of contested headers. Now, contested headers mainly happen at corners, but I'd argue it's reduced the ability of players to win headers at corners just as much as it has the accuracy of the header. And yet that's not what was said. So, do you know what I mean? I think you've got to kind of take every change with a bit of nuance and play enough games to understand how big the change might be and how much it's affected it. And if you didn't think power shots had been reduced a lot, just watch like the third week of the FC Pro event and watch last night's FC Pro event, and you will see a drastic difference in how power shots are being utilized. They're still good. They are still a great way to score, as they were last year, just nobody did them. And now again, so I think you've got to treat everything with a bit of nuance. It was kind of the word of the podcast when we were with 𝘭𝘪𝘬𝘐, and the changes are nuanced, and a reduction doesn't mean it will never happen. In the same way that I'm sure when we get a 𝘃𝑟𝑣𝐿𝑎/finesse shot patch, people are still going to score 𝘃𝑟𝑣𝐿𝑎s and finesse shots because contextually in certain places it should go in the back of the net. So yeah, I think it's always a difficulty when you're making a change to a game. I don't think the reading comprehension of the vast majority of the community is that high. And there's a lot of words in those patch notes, even though it's only about 7 lines long. So some of them are quite long as well. So, responsiveness, what does that mean? Anyway.
How many people are actually finding out this information through the actual notes is probably, word of mouth, hearing it from a creator talking about the patch or what they think's changed, and it's all a bit vague sometimes. So yeah, always good to actually read the pitch notes, I find it actually does help get my gameplay as well, because you kind of learn what has changed and what you might need to adjust as a result. Right, let's take a break and we'll be back to talk about tactics right after this. Hello, welcome back after the break. Right, to continue, actually, we ended up talking about it at the end a little bit there. The interview with Tom Cleffy, we obviously talked a lot about Role Plus and Role Plus Plus and the impact that those had on gameplay. When we spoke about the interview sort of in hindsight last week on the Sport episode, we perhaps didn't talk so much about what we felt the impact should be, having listened to that, on your gameplay or the way you think about tactics. And I think the video that the Panthers put out, Josh, which you obviously were heavily involved in, was a really good, illustration of the sorts of things, I guess, to look out for as a result of what we've kind of picked up about roles. So it might be helpful if you maybe summarize a few of the things that sort of Nep was saying that he'd taken, and I know you've been taking as well, into your gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is just how important roles are. And I think a lot of people had understood roles were important, but maybe hadn't quite understood exactly why. And I think that's a mistake on EA's part. I don't think they've given nearly enough information or like educational literature on like how this all works. There's no manual for the game, as it were. And the real important bits of information in what was being said was about where stats are being used. And the two main stats were defensive awareness and attacking positioning. And those two stats determine where your players will stand or make runs when they aren't being controlled. And because you can only really control two players at any one time yourself, like you can direct a run and be controlling another player, that is a really, really important part of your setup in your team. Where if you're frustrated that your players aren't making runs or aren't making the moves you want, or that the flow of your team doesn't work, the roles are a massive aspect of that. And when you pressed him on, like, what percentages would you give to out of position, no familiarity, a role plus, and a role plus plus, those four differences are massive. And when you then start looking at the individual stats themselves, can change which chemistry styles you apply to your players. Because do you need the extra 4 pace that a shadow gives you on your centre back, or would you prefer the extra 4 positioning that might be being boosted by another 20% by being in a role plus plus? And that extra positioning, will it mean that you don't need that extra pace to be able to get back? So those kinds of questions are things that I think Nep had listened to the podcast and started taking those into account. And he ran his team. I think he had an anchor on 𝘬𝘰𝗍𝗯 and no pace chemistry styles on anybody else, and got his best result in champs of the entire cycle. So, and also putting as many players as possible on a role plus plus. He had some players that only had a plus, but did that as well in a team that made sense from a footballing perspective, like where the players would go and stand. And so we kind of put that into a video, tried to like use some clips from the podcast and surmise and show the difference between players in game. You know, there's a great tweet by 𝘵𝗫𝗀 moment that I've talked about a few times, showing the difference between a box-to-box plus player and just a box-to-box with no affinity, and how much ground they cover just in terms of the heat map is like massively different, especially in attack. There's a game that we use in the video where somebody was beating Nep 3-1 at half time, was much the better player, and then for whatever reason brought Adama Traore on at right back, and it was just like walking through his back line because Adama Traore would either sprint off, he'd run up the pitch and be out of position and not mark. If a cross went to the back post, he was never in the right position. So I think it's really opened people's eyes to the importance of a role plus plus, and actually the importance of what your team does when you aren't controlling them. A lot of people forget that and focus on, well, I can't pass or I can't dribble. But actually, if your players are making runs and are in space, the pass doesn't have to be perfect, because it just needs to go in a general area because they've made the run into space. So, I mean, like in terms of that video specifically, we've never had as many like positive comments and people saying like, I've changed this in my team and I've noticed a vast improvement in the way that it plays. So it's been really interesting to see what a little bit of information from EA about an area of the game can do to your understanding and how you play the game and how much it can improve your results.
Yeah, I've noticed specifically, particularly, I think it's quite obvious with fullbacks, the plus, because the kind of, not a misconception, but I think the sort of straightforward thing people may think about is work rates, that it's just like a plus player has high, for example, so they're going to get up and down at sort of the maximum speed that they can possibly do within the limitations of their speed, I suppose. Whereas actually, it's not just about that, it's also about their positioning defensively, like you were talking about in that video, where 𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗀𝘀𝘀 defensive positioning is just absolutely shocking. Like, that is, I guess, because, his defensive awareness is pretty bad, but on top of that, he also doesn't have any role at all. So it is really important, I guess, to think about these things, not just in attack, which I think a lot of people have really mainly thought, what's the movement like of my inside forward plus. Actually, starting to think about how it impacts you defensively is probably quite a good thing to be considering as well. And as I said, I think the fullback positions are particularly affected by it. Defensive midfielders as well. It's interesting though, because I guess maybe at the pro level, Richard, is not seen as such a huge thing, because I guess there's a lot more manual repositioning going on.
I think offensively, there's you probably the way that your team sort of shapes up before you get control of them is important, but then as soon as you can start making runs and controlling where the players are moving, I think it sort of, there's a bit of an imbalance. But I also, pro players are very stubborn, and if they find something that works, they'll typically not change. Like the way that people were playing before in sort of the power shot meta was, look, we're going to, especially when the 5-back, before that was nerfed, like, the pro players didn't even probably realise what the roles were, like, because it was, I found a way to succeed and I'm going to do this. So I think it will sort of play a bigger factor as the year goes on, and especially as more players, like Team of the Year, I imagine all those players are going to have nearly multiple plus in different positions, and you're going to sort of see real vast stats and vast areas where people can play.
And actually, Jeppe, do you think that sort of your regular player might actually sort of uncover something that works really well around roles that pro players are unlikely to even try, just because I guess pro players don't necessarily want to take risks? As Richard was saying, they want the consistency of maybe players' positioning. Whereas I guess if you're, not moving players around yourself so much, and you're a bit less, or a bit more willing to kind of like allow the players to move around themselves, and maybe create less consistent patterns, that actually means you might stumble upon something that works really well with roles, I guess, that pro players wouldn't.
I guess you could say that, because for the pro players, as Richard explained perfectly, it's more about the manual movement and how you use the player lock, how you use you manually trigger the runs. Then offensively, it doesn't really impact too much. But I think for the non-pros, the more casual players, the roles are way more important than it is for pro players. I guess defensively, as it has already been covered, it's really important. But I guess attacking wise for the casual players, it's just, I guess if you're playing, one thing is out of position, but the role plus and role plus pluses are really, really a big key to achieving good results for casual players, because they typically don't trigger many manual runs, or they just wait for the AI to make some movement. And by the time that a player without a role plus or role plus but should have made the best run, they've already lost the ball and need to recover from there. So I guess that's one way to view it. But another perspective is also that a lot of players start to watch the pro players and see what they do. And then they see that the roles does not really have a big effect for them. And then automatically start to adapt that point of view, meaning it applies for them. So I also believe that while they might learn a bit more, because the pro players just basically do what is the meta, and then on the other hand, the casuals also miss out on a big opportunity to learn. And being completely transparent and honest, I was also a bit mind blown when I heard the last podcast about the Role Plus and Role Plus pluses, because yes, I had a quite good idea what it was about, but not to the extent that it turned out to be, because I think the importance is way higher than we initially thought it was going to be. I guess that's the longer answer. So just one example, in the beginning of the game, I played with Bernardo Silva as a half winger just because I wanted to try it. And he was like Messi for me, an amazing player. Then I played him without a Role Plus, and he was just terrible, basically. So it can really, for some players, it can make such a big difference. But I guess for a player like Theo Hernandez, he doesn't really need a plus or plus. If you get that, yeah, that's really good. But for a player like him, it doesn't really affect too much. Whereas if you have a player that is not as agile, not as fast, not as good in the attacking runs, that would be really, really beneficial. Because I think it's a really complex thing that hopefully we'll all learn a bit more about. Because I don't really think there's one answer, to be honest.
I think what's going to be so interesting as the year goes on is how is there, because right now you would probably say that having a player on a good Role Plus outweighs a player being on nothing but with like better stats. At what point does like having more sort of, I'll say like greedy stats and better play styles than playing someone on a no Role Plus just in their position outweigh playing a worse player on a plus? I think that's going to be quite interesting.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think Theo Hernandez is a great example of that, because people aren't going to be playing him obviously on a plus, maybe not even on a plus, right? And he's just so physically dominant, and his stats are really good as well. The Bruiser Plus, he's just someone that is so good versus the other players that you could use there right now that is accepted that he may be slightly worse positionally, but actually, he has all right defensive awareness, I guess. So maybe he's not completely caught out like that. 𝘵𝗫𝗻𝗄 𝗬𝘃 we were talking about. It'd be interested to hear from you though, Richard, about one of the, I guess, shocks of 𝘵FC Pro so far, to some extent, maybe not completely, would be the fact that 𝗵𝗪𝗀𝗀 did so well this week with the 4-5-1.
Yeah, I don't think it's not necessarily a shock 𝗵𝗪𝗀𝗀 doing well. It's the shock of the formation that he played. He used a 4-5-1 high defensive approach with short passing, and it was really, really interesting how easy he found it. In the first two games, he actually didn't concede a goal. He scored 6 and 8 in his first two. He won his first 4 games, and the only loss he picked up was against Mr. 𝘬𝘃𝗀𝘀𝘀 𝗬𝘂𝗍𝘂, when he switched into a 4-4-2 to try and, in his mind, he probably thought, this is the toughest game of the night, I'm going to switch formation. And Levy beat him. But yeah, that 4-5-1, it was clinical. The wide players were always sort of making that run in between centre-back and full-back, giving the options, whether it was Rafael Leão on the left or Mo Salah on the right. He had Drogba up top, as you would expect, for the power shots. And then his midfield three that he actually played with, if memory serves me correctly, was Globetrotters Douglas Luiz, Bruno Fernandes, the incisive pass plus Bruno, not the regular one, and also Xavi, just regular Xavi as his 3 centre mids. And he dominated. He's probably the best player we've seen over the course of the 4 weeks so far.
Well, yeah. So actually, I'll run through his tactic, I suppose. I'll put the code in the description as well for people to try it. But he had goalkeeper on sweeper keeper balanced, right back on wing back balanced, the centre backs on defender defend, wing back balanced on the left back as well, inside forward on the right mid, and that's balanced, playmaker roaming on the right centre mid, holding defend on the centre mid, I should say, and playmaker attack on the left centre mid, and inside forward balanced on the left mid, advance forward attack on the striker. And yeah, it's kind of interesting actually, because I guess, Josh, one of the things here is the use of the wing back role on the fullback, which is something I think we've been talking about as being a strong option. The new focus actually support I've been really enjoying, but considering the, I guess, perceived smart thing to do was just to, or I guess competitive thing to do was just to have at least one of your fullbacks on, fullback defend or something. It's quite nice to see.
Yeah, I wonder, specifically in 𝘵𝘊𝘂𝘂's formation, I wonder if it's to force the inside forwards to move inside a little earlier and a little quicker than they would do otherwise. He was playing Salah on the right side and was looking for that finesse shot fairly consistently. And the wing-back role, I found, forces the inside forward to move inside quicker. If you have them on attacking wing-back, it kind of just neuters an inside forward full stop. Like, they don't really make runs even on a plus, like because they're waiting almost for the overlap before they then make the run. But on wing back balanced, they do just like cut inside a little earlier. So I wonder if that was an element of like why he played with them on wing backs. I also think in build up as well, the wing back balanced, it pushes them high enough up the pitch that they are a passing option when you're recycling the ball, but not so far that they're easily counted on. So I think it's kind of, if you're a patient build-up player, it's probably the right option to have your wing backs on. I'll be honest, I found the whole Pro Open kind of fascinating last night, not least because there was a lot of talk about how with power shot plus, or first-time power shots being nerfed, that we'd see a vast reduction in goals. And it made me look at how many goals were scored. On 3 of the 4 nights, exactly 95 goals were scored, which is which last night was 95 as well, which is a crazy level of consistency. I think the other one was 92, which was the third week. So it clearly didn't have that much of an effect, but I think it's another like feather in the cap almost of the new tactic system that we're seeing formations that people aren't really running and seeing them being used at the highest level of the game. Now, as we mentioned, like the pros don't utilize the roll pluses as much because a lot of it is more manual in terms of how they're moving the ball around and moving their players around. But it's great to see, and also kind of fascinating to see how certain role combinations in the midfield just seem to rise to the top. Like in the 4-4-1-1 I've talked about previously, box to box and roaming. I saw Tex using that in his 4-4-1-1. And then this week I've been using a 3-man midfield with a holding midfielder and 2 playmakers, which is what 𝘵𝘊𝘂𝘂's using. So it is really interesting to see how those kind of things play out. I love it. I love to see it.
It was Maicon he used at right back, by the way, who I'm pretty sure is wing back plus as well.
Yeah, he is.
I think that's a combination of Maicon being the best viable option he could get in the price and him possessing the role plus that he wanted.
Yeah, I've been quite lucky to have quite a few wingback plus players, I guess, and yeah, I've been really enjoying using them. But anything to add in terms of the tactic here?
Well, I guess that one reason for the formation could also be about the playstyles, because when I saw the team and his 3 centre mids, he's got a pink pass, he's got an incisive pass, and tiki-taka. So I think that's one of the key reasons I haven't watched him play, but that's the first thing that springs to my mind, because technically you could do it in a 4-3-3, you could do it in different variations, but he's got 3 players that can control the midfield, that it's a bit more balanced and more defensive also. But he's got the pink pass to go for the driven passes if he wants to. He's got the incisive, that's really good for through balls. He's got the tiki-taka, which is really nice for first-time passes. So he's got a bit of everything, and you can't do that in a 4-4-2, for example. So I guess this is a formation that allows him to do different stuff and be a bit more unpredictable in attack in general, because a 4-5-1 flat would be a defensive formation if you look at it. But then you look at the players he's got, and suddenly he's got some opportunities to go forward out of nowhere, basically.
Yeah, it's a good point about the player choices in terms of the playstyle pluses, because actually, Richard, it feels like incisive pass plus has become the new long ball pass plus. You don't really see long ball pass so much.
No, you really don't. 𝘵𝘚𝗫 has been really good, and especially I've noticed myself. I've been using 𝘬𝘯𝘰, the upgraded hero, at my centre mid slot, and he's got that incisive pass plus, and it almost like you don't even have to play it like accurately; that it will just lock on if you press through ball to a player. No, it's very strong, and pinged pass as well, which I think is often forgotten about, and in that passing category, it is very, very good at just sort of forcing the ball almost through the thirds. I also think right now the attacking players there's better, more meta, should I say, cheaper attacking players that players can get in the draft than there is really, really, really like high tier defensive players in the game. And that will switch at some point. Like the fact that Gold Van Dijk and Gold Theo Hernandez are the only 2 gold items in teams, and both of those are defenders, I think sort of shows where the high tier promo defenders are. Like I can't really recall many.
Yeah.
It seems quite on purpose that we've not seen a lot of those players coming out yet, but I imagine we'll start to see it, and it will improve defensive capabilities for these pro players.
Nice. It's certainly been interesting to see sort of, a bit of a tactical shift as well as gameplay shift happen over the last week or so. Let's take a break here, and we'll be back to get some more tips after the break. Hello, a quick reminder in this break to both listeners and supporters. There is a supported Discord for gold or icon supporters of the podcast, and in there you'll find a whole section where you can arrange rush matches and get some good teammates to make progress. And there is a champs channel for commiserating about champs generally or getting a bit of advice. And there's the Foot Advice channel, which is specifically for all Ultimate Team advice. There's plenty of other resources in there too, and a fantastic community. So if you haven't signed up already, then do sign up, become a supporter on the gold or icon tiers, and you'll get the bonus podcast that you get on the bonus podcast tier, plus access to the Discord too. It would be great to have you in there. Just search Support Foot Weekly, and you can find the options for signing up over on Patreon. A huge thank you if you decide to do so, and a huge thank you, of course, to all those supporters keeping the podcast going. And let's jump back into this week's pod. Hello, welcome back after the break. Now, something that I did want to ask you, Jeppe, is if you had any recommendations for holding on to the ball and, I guess, maintaining possession kind of in the final third of the pitch where you're likely to come under more pressure. Because although there have been changes, it's less easy for defenders to sort of win the ball from behind. It's still not exactly easy. And you mentioned maybe it would be nice if the dribbling patch had gone a bit further, because it is still tricky to, I guess, maintain control of the ball or keep the ball in those areas. So any tips on that?
I guess the first tip would be keep it simple. The left stick dribbling offers so many opportunities that we probably don't think about. You can use it to create movement, you can use it to create angles in attack, but you can also use it to protect the ball. And whenever you move on the left stick, one thing is the angle you get for the pass itself, but when you point towards a player and you start moving towards a player, then the AI would need to find a different position. I guess we've all seen that in defense when we pull a player out of position. Then we pull them into, for example, the right back position. Then the right back needs to find a different position. And it works the exact same way in attack. So when you go into another player's position, the AI automatically needs to find a different position. And knowing that, we can create some chaos in the build-up for some chaos for the opponent, basically. If you use the left stick dribbling and you use the R1 dribbling, I'm a really, really big fan of the R1 dribbling because it's a mixture of the just jog dribbling, normal dribbling, and then the sprint. I guess everyone, the first advice they would give is don't sprint. Don't sprint all the time. Don't sprint 24/7. But when we just use the left stick and we are trying to actually create some momentum, using some sprint boost and all that stuff, there's just not enough tempo in the left stick dribbling moving forward. So you need a mixture of that. And I guess if you ever doubt whether you should sprint or not, then the answer is R1, because you can still use the R1 and being really controlled. You can also use it to shift away from the opponent. But start with the left stick, practice the left stick, learn the different angles, and then I would say I've seen a couple of goals also on pro level where players tend to pass it back to the goalkeeper. And we've all seen some really sketchy animations where this seems a bit unlucky. But at the same time, I've seen so many goals where players pass it to a centre back and then they put themselves under pressure, then pass it to the goalkeeper, and then complaining when the goalkeeper makes a mistake. It's a different debate whether the game should not really allow that. But knowing that there's a higher possibility or risk of a mistake being made by the goalkeeper, for example, should really put you into a position where you don't really want to do that. You don't want to take that risk if you could do something else. I don't really know if that makes sense, but I just guess that casual players only, or tend to at least, do something and then be surprised by the outcome of the game rather than thinking there's a high chance of this happening when I do this. Even though it's not logical, even if it doesn't make sense, then it still happens. And you really got to look at the facts sometimes and the previous and past experiences. If you've seen that happen a lot of time, then maybe you should take that info in.
I hope 𝘬𝘃𝗧𝗏 is listening.
Well, yeah.
Anything, Josh, you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I mean, just to something I think we've said before, pass with your play styles as well. When you're passing out of defense, if you've got a player who's got a passing play style, try and use that form of passing to do it, because it's going to be more accurate, it's going to be more consistent, might get you out of a tricky situation. It will help the receiver of the ball as well, especially if you've got a ping pass plus player or a ping pass player. That helps the person receiving the ball. Tiki-taka as well allows you to first time it. All those kinds of things to keep in mind. I kind of just want to pick up on something that Jeppe briefly mentioned, which was luck. I saw you tweet, if you don't follow Jeppe on Instagram, on Twitter, I'd highly recommend it, because some really interesting ways of thinking about the game specifically. And you tweeted about luck recently and how you feel like the way people can approach the game from a luck perspective reduces their own kind of autonomy over the game, and actually you could put yourself in position to be more lucky. And I wondered if you could just expand on that a little bit here.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because I do believe that it's something we always tend to have a negative perspective on luck. And well, luck is for everyone. Luck happens for everyone. And there's a reason it's called luck. You can't really control that. But in the game, certain positions and scenarios where it's more likely there's going to be some luck involved. So why not try to utilize that knowledge? So the previous example I gave is probably still the best example here. We know that before corners clear goal, there's some luck involved in that. Well, the luck part of that would be the first time power shot, because you don't really know where that's going. If you score, that's really nice, but that's more a luck calculation you do there to get the corners. If you know you get lucky from corners, then why wouldn't you try to get some more corners, for example? If you know that this is a bad example, but let's pretend that you knew there is a certain angle, a specific angle where the goalkeeper glitched or where there's a higher chance of that happening, then why wouldn't you go for a 𝗬𝘃𝗧𝗏 in that angle, or for the finish shot, for example? And I guess luck is just a part of it, and we like to use it to explain when we lose. Why wouldn't we also just accept it as a basic fact of the game, and then also take advantage of it and use it as an explanation when we win? I know for sure that sometimes I got lucky, but I was also at the same time, and that might sound contradictory, but I know sometimes I've been lucky, but I've also been strategic and clever enough to search for the luck. I know I can't 100% create it, but I'm the one responsible for getting into the positions where I might potentially get lucky. For example, via finesse, I might not get the perfect angle, but I know that as long as I get into this kind of area, there's a good chance that I'm going to score or that the keeper doesn't catch it, and therefore I'm searching for the luck.
It's funny actually, because my favourite phrase when I'm playing 11 player clubs against another 11 is gamble, which is basically just just stick the pressure on somebody. Like, you often forget that you're playing against another person, and they will feel pressure. Especially if you're in a champs game and you're trailing by a goal, and you can see that they're starting to clear the ball as soon as they get it, and the pressing circle, and they're jumping into tackles. When you get in the box, take an extra touch and dribble. There's a good chance you'll get wiped out. Like, take shots if you feel as though you can score corners or they're not moving the goalkeeper. Like, play the opponent more than like playing the game sometimes. But then on other occasions, just play what you see. Like, I've over the last sort of week and a half, I've played a lot of this game, especially over the last patch and whatnot, and I have been really, really enjoying it. And I think it is just me. Like, I've got a decent understanding of what I need to do now in order to win, and it's almost like the game is split up very, very easily from, like, I know what angles to shoot on, I know where to play, and if I am trailing, I know that I can just throw players up the pitch, and 9 times out of 10, like, I will get something. You'll get a bounce, or you'll get something out of the game if you continue to play it. Like, that's the main reason I'll never quit, particularly from a game, because it will always turn at some point in your favour.
Nice. Well, Richard, as you've been enjoying the game, we should ask you, what tactics are you using?
Yeah, so I'm back to a 4-4-2, Sam Allardyce style. Get the ball down.
Have you got a big man, small man?
Do you know what? I'm using Cantona and 𝗵𝗀𝘀 up top. So I do.
Yeah, you do.
I'm using Cantona false 9++ on build up. I've got 𝗵𝗀𝘀 advanced forward ++, complete striker. I've got Vinny Jr. on the left, inside forward attack, which is no roll ++. Mateus, left centre mid, box to box ++. 𝘬𝘠𝘃, right centre mid, playmaker ++ on Roman. I recently did the Mahrez 𝗵𝗽𝘀. So I'm using Mahrez right mid on wide playmaker on build up. Estupiñán, left back, full back, balanced. Bastoni, I've gone against my word. Last week I said I'd never use someone on ball playing, but I thought with all this roll chat, I'll try it. 𝘬𝘁𝘄𝑏laser Bastoni, left centre back, on ball playing defender ++. I'm using Thuram, Lilian Thuram, typically a right back. I'm using him centre back because he does have that position, and it's just a bit of a cheat code having like a 90 pace CB. Just defender on no rolls, and then I'm using Philipp Lahm, false back ++ on balanced. He's sort of the difference maker because he'll step into midfield, and I found with intercept plus his play style, he wins the ball back so much in midfield. When people are trying to play through him on midfield, having him stepping in, it's just like almost a bit of a cheat code, like an instant win back if the ball's anywhere near him to intercept it.
I bet people are thinking, like he's 4-4-2, both his centre mids are further forward, and then Lahm's just there sweeping up at the back, I guess.
Yeah, and then I'm using Donnarumma in goal, the Centurion Donnarumma, which I think is the best goalkeeper I've used this year. He's really, really solid. I like him a lot. And I'm using him on goalkeeper ++, just balanced, nothing sweeper keeper or anything like that, just standard goalkeeper. So it's sort of, it lines up in a 4-4-2, but it sort of plays as like a 2. My CB is holding, like obviously back. Estupiñán out on the left, defensive-ish. Lahm into midfield. 𝘬𝘠𝘃 gets right up. And that's where the incisive pass is just so clinical in the final third. Mateus is just everywhere. And then Mahrez tucks in a little bit, and it's sort of like a front three then with Vinny Jr. going past Cantona, which I really like because Cantona can also pass a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you find the false 9 combination with the 2 striker seems to be working quite well, because I guess that's kind of nice because there's a lot of false 9 players in the game in terms of role plus and plus that maybe people don't tend to use because it's not such a useful role perhaps as others.
Yeah, I think I wanted to get Cantona on that ++, just to see what I could get out of him really. And he's got advanced forward plus, but I wanted the double roll on him, and yeah, he's different from a lot of the other strikers that I've used, where I can dribble with him. Obviously, the 5-star skills is really nice, but he's physical. He can shoot. He's got pace. Obviously, the power shot is what it is. We know that it's super strong. But when he does sort of tuck in a little bit and drop deep, I've found that he occupies the space that Vinny Jr. leaves. So he'll sort of like drift over to the left of when Vinny Jr. goes past him. And it's really nice because the outball that I've actually found a lot of the time is if the ball's on the right hand side, he'll drift over to the left and he will always beat my opponent's right back in that aerial battle. Because typically he's just superior physically. And then I can get the ball down and play again on the other side of the pitch. Yeah,
he's almost like perfect for that false nine role. Like if you're building a false nine player, the fact he's got power shot plus means he's a threat from distance. He's got cracking passing stats. He's got incisive pass as a base play style as well. But as you said, has got technical and first touch with the 5-star skill, so can dribble with it. He's really is like an all-round package.
Yeah, honestly, pound for pound, 850k.
Yeah, got to get him in.
Actually, Richard, do send me the code for that, and I'll put it in the description. I think we're basically ready to wrap up, unless, Jeppe, you've got any final words of wisdom. I guess people might be playing a champs this weekend as they go into the Christmas period, trying to get those final tokens, perhaps, or mode mastery players. Any bits of advice that you might give to people doing that?
I guess one of the things you should be focusing on is not playing when you're tired, and don't get too emotionally invested. If you get your sleep, you remember to eat well, then you're not as easily frustrated. So I guess there's a lot you can do on the pitch and you can do in the game. But I guess the thing that actually makes the biggest difference is making sure that you sort out all the stuff that impacts how you react to adversity and how you react when you feel like the game is not really treating you well, because that's really what's going to make the difference.
Yeah, and maybe, go easy on the mold wines before you play your champs games.
That gets me an extra 3 wins.
It's like a darts player, a couple of pints.
Honestly, I just stopped caring. I
think there is probably an optimal point, where it just sort of loosens you up a bit and you can play a bit more freely. So, and actually, speaking of the Christmas period, of course, the Christmas quiz will be out over Christmas. This is the last episode, actually, I guess, regular episode before the new year, but you can look forward to the Christmas quiz. I think dropping probably Christmas Eve. So looking forward to that. And then we will be back, as I said, in the new year at some point, unconfirmed at this point, but I guess keep your eye on your feeds as we enter the new year period. And thank you very much for joining us on this gameplay podcast and I guess throughout the year for these gameplay episodes, Richard. It's been good to have you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to jump on, and I look forward to coming back in 2025, which seems it seems a long time ago since we were doing the Foot Champs podcast back in 2018.
Yeah, wow, that's a throwback, 2018. And thank you very much to Jeppe as well. Been great to have you back on the podcast for the first time in 25.
Yeah, thank you very much, man. I really enjoyed it.
Always good. And thank you very much to JoshXLS as well.
Yes, keep your frustration at a minimum over the Christmas period. It's just a game at the end of the day. You don't want your family thinking ill of you. So, take a break, space it out, do it when you can.
Yeah, a very good point. And thank you very much, of course, to all you listeners out there listening in. If you're catching this on YouTube, then do drop a comment. Let us know what you think. Leave a like. It definitely helps. And of course, subscribe. And talking of subscribing, you could subscribe instead on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you want an extra podcast every single week, apart from actually over the Christmas period, because of course the Christmas quiz is just out for everyone, then you can do so via the Patreon. Just search Support for Weekly. And I guess, Christmas being a time for giving, why not? And talking of giving, thank you to all those supporters supporting the podcast, keeping it going, including those icon patrons: Dave B, Hugh J, Jeff B, Darren W, Warren A, Stephen M, Waterman, Dan W, Roger D, Rob P, Lee A, Dom P, L M, Damon H, The Shirt Locker, Alex M, Tom B, Jake S, Neil P, Michael K, David G, Andrew R, Michael H, Jimmy K, Brendan T, Berta Saka, Michael B, Brian V, Josh R, Brent P, Rob W, and Juicy. Plus a special thanks to Luke M, Dave B, Hugh J, Tom M, Darren W, and Pato Foot for advice and production assistance. Before I leave you, just one more thing to add though. Ultimate Team is a bit like life really. It has its many ups and downs. If you're having a few more downs than ups in real life in these more difficult times, then please don't feel that you're alone or need to struggle on without taking action. If you go to thecalmzone.net, there's loads of resources, advice, support, or even just a friendly chat for anyone who needs it. If it sounds like it could help you, then head over to thecalmzone.net. And for now, have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next podcast.